Alright, in the first part of this project we generated names and IDs for the students and names and rooms for the teachers. This is meant to test on the SAT day. People get loaner Chromebooks and then I have to track them down at the end to get them back. So I can't test now because the data doesn't exist. People are going to sign up in the morning and I want to test beforehand with some fake data. We got students with IDs and most of them have a first and last name, but you'll see every once in a while they throw in a title like Mr., which I don't think we're going to see on any of the students. And then with the teachers we even have some suffixes like a medical title or the third, which I don't think we're going to see either. So we're going to cut those today, but we're going to add a few things that I really do want to test for. Number one is accent marks. I don't know exactly where the data is coming from, but it'll definitely have a few. And number two is multi-part names. It's not always just first and last. It might be first with two names, like a Mary Jo or a Juan Carlos, and it might be last with two names. Sometimes that happens hyphenated, sometimes that happens just two separate names, and other times it happens with a single name but it's multi-words like De La Cruz or something. And I don't see any of those in the names that Faker is giving me, so we're going to have to work a little to get them. Instead of adding a bunch in here where I have my layers of methods and functions that I'm stacking up, and then I have to do it again over here, I'm just going to make a separate little function, handle all that, get the name, and then boom, we put it in the list. So let's make a thing called full name, and if I want to change that later, we can always change that. Now, I believe Faker has a first name method and a last name method, and when we call those, we're going to solve one of our problems, which is, I'm pretty sure they don't put titles in there. Like if I ask for first, they're never going to say Dr. John. It's always just going to be John. So if I ask for first and last separately, let me just, as a little test, let me just print 100 of these just to see what happens. Now I'm going to comment out the rest for a moment. And we're going to see that they'll give me a tuple, because that's how I return from the function, in one thing of first, one thing of second. And these are all singles. There's no multi-part, there's no title, and that's good for now, but I do want to get some multi-part ones. Just like last time, I remember saying, hey, on this room number thing, we're generating room numbers, we threw in an upper to get uppercase. Yeah, I said there's probably a way to ask Faker to do that, but I'll just use my Python string methods. In here, where I'm going to specifically ask for some hyphenated last names, yeah, there's probably a way to get Faker to do that, but I'm just going to do it myself by having to and putting a hyphen or a space. So one thing I want to do is every once in a while throw in an extra. So let's do that. Faker has some random number generation, and I'll go ahead and use that instead of importing random when I don't need to. So I'm just going to make a general guess and say 5% of names will have a hyphen, 5% of names will have a space, and then the other 90% will just be a single last name. So let's make a little comment here. 5% of names hyphenated. So an example would be like Anya Taylor-Joy. She has a double last name with a hyphen. Okay. Another 5% spaced. So that's like somebody who has two last names, but they're just separate, like Andrew Lloyd Webber. I think he has two B's. And then 90% just single last name. So that would be like, you know, Tom Hanks. Just one last name. Okay? So I'm going to say, let's just roll a die, or get some number 1 out of 10. Okay? I'll call it a die. And yeah, there are dice with 10 sides. Not very common, but we'll say die roll equals fake, and I believe they have a method called pyint, which gives you a Python integer. Let's try that. They have 3 parameters, and it seems kind of like the range, but they include the top. So when I say 0 to 9, it includes 9, where normally a Python range, or a range in any language, wouldn't. So this is going to give me 10 possibilities, 0 to 9. And I'll say, if it's a 0, we hyphen. If it's a 1, we space. If it's anything else, we do nothing and just stay with the general single last name that we already got a couple lines ago. So let's say if we're 0, then we're going to go last plus equals hyphen, and then we'll get another one of these guys. And then if it's 1, we'll do exactly the same thing with a space. So now I'm going to run that, and we'll get 100 of these. About 5 will be hyphenated, about 5 will be spaced, if I did it right. So yeah, there we go. We got a double last name, which we do have plenty of those in our data, and when we look up students, that will happen. And we will get some hyphenated, which we do have plenty of those in our data, and when we look up students or look up teachers, we'll see some of those. And at a quick glance, I'm not seeing any titles. I'm pretty sure when we ask for first and last, they don't include the Mr. and the MD and the DDS and the juniors that they were in the full names. So this is accomplishing our goal, and it's closer to what we're going to see in real life, because when I get this data from a Google Sheet or an Excel file or something, it's going to have first as a column and last as a column, whereas in our earlier version the name was 1 string, and when it's 2 words that's easy to split, but when it's more, maybe not. So this is great. We're getting a tuple, and let's go ahead and incorporate it into our larger thing, which is the lists. So instead of this fake.name, I'm going to go with our function that we just made called full name. And I know there's more to change, but I'm going to hit run and just see what happens. I don't really need that print anymore. We can take that off, because now they're in the files, which is what we actually want. So let's take a look at these files. We've got a nice mix. There's some hyphens. Probably there will be a double with no hyphen. But now it looks weird. I don't need these commas and quotes and parentheses. Well, maybe the commas. But how can we say, here's a tuple, don't make it look like a tuple, make it look like what we'll get out of our spreadsheet? Well, last time when we got some data from a spreadsheet, it was a CSV, comma separated. So let's go ahead and do that. So instead of tabs, I'm going to go comma. And then inside of here, now that the student is a 2-part thing and the teacher is a 2-part thing, we'll just also comment those. So I think this will work. Python in the newest version has upgraded the F strings to be a lot more powerful, and they can have F strings inside of F strings or quotes inside of quotes and all kinds of things that may not exist in the CodeHS environment we're running now, but let's give it a try. I'm going to go comma dot join and I'm making sure to use different kinds of quotes. These are single quotes inside of double quotes. In the newest version of Python, you don't have to do that, but in here I think you might. So let's run that and give it a go. And then there's just one more thing I want to change before I'm satisfied with this part. So it gives me my little done print down here, and now when I look at the students, okay, they look like what I saw in our last project when I got a CSV file. CSV means comma separated value, and these are comma separated, columns. Now it looks kind of dumb that they're all squished together. Human readable stuff would be more spaced, but this is meant to be readable by the computer when we pick it up at the end and use them to look up where a student is or who's in a certain room. So this looks good to me. I see some hyphenated last names, and I see some double last name. But what I don't see, the thing I mentioned at the beginning, I don't see accent marks. And I probably would if I kept running it 100 times, and there would be some very low rate of, Renee with an accent on the E or something like that. But if I want to get some, there's a locale option in the Faker. You can set it to give Italian names, that was their example on the website, or Japanese names if you're going to get totally different characters. What I'm going to do is ask for Spanish Mexican names, because I know those are going to have a good amount of accents, usually on the vowels, and that's going to match pretty well what we might see in our real life data too. So when you make the Faker, you can pass in EN-US is English US, which is our default because the computer that it's running on has a location somewhere stored in there. But then you can just give it more than one. And so let's say that. I think that's what we want. Let's try to run it. We don't have to change any of the rest because when we create the Faker object, it will be initialized to generate certain things. This affects more than the name. When I set locales, it might do license plates differently, or it might do phone numbers differently. And luckily we don't have to worry about that in here. But if you do, the Faker object has quite a bit of depth to it for those who look. So let's take a gander here. Yeah, right there I've got an accent mark, the most common accent mark, which is the acute accent on the E. It's the only one I know how to type. You go Alt 130, because that shows up a lot in Spanish and French. But if we look, we'd see that same one on an A. There's one on a capital A. There's a couple other guys, and that's a good mix because I want to be able to handle those in my data. So that's the end of this part. We got rid of the titles and the suffixes. We got the names in a nicer format. We got some doubles, and we got some accents. So this is going to match what I pull from the spreadsheet in the end, which means it's a good test data to see if that's going to work. There we go.